G'day people, Heff here, and I'm joined by Checkers, and what we're doing today is we're going to be chatting about some AFL fantasy players that probably aren't the most talked about names in the game. The whole idea of this is to find a bit more kind of obscure names, a bit more undervalued kind of players and things like that. So, they're not all going to be perfect selections. And I guess the point is we're a little bit, we're just trying to think outside the square and kind of not discuss the same names that we hear over and over again in the AFL fantasy, especially in the salary cap space. So, Checkers, good to have you here today. How you going, mate?
When you were saying that intro, I had in my head the Brett Kirk speech. We're not always going to get it right, but just like you, we care. Like that was what was running through my head. It was just, we're picking some roughies, and roughies don't always get up. They're not always the best pick, but they can get you to climb the rankings really quick, especially if they're very low ownership. So, have a scroll through the bottom of the apps. Not the top of the apps or the top of the news articles that you see on the Herald Sun or the AFL.com.au. These are the articles you won't be reading anywhere. So,
well, the thing is, I find with fantasy, if you look at the winners and stuff over the years, or like even the year that you finished, what was it, 12th overall, wasn't it?
9th
overall. They kind of come in like two ways, really, when you look at winners. You don't make a mistake all season, or you do something that no one else is doing that gives you the leg up, essentially. And it's very hard not to make a mistake all season. I find it probably easier to kind of do something left field and something a little bit different to kind of propel you up the rankings, I guess. Now, I can't really speak from practice because I've never actually won a hat before, but you're a man who has done this before. And do you have like that season that you actually kind of went well in AFL fantasy, that was more your perspective? Yeah, you kind of went for players that other people weren't doing, and that kind of got you ahead of the game.
I feel like this meant like this thought process that the more point of difference players you need to use is the deeper further you are from the top. So it's like if you're at the top, you got to just play it safe and just ride the wave. You're already up the top, people are chasing you. But if you want to chase the top and you're like find yourself 20,000, then you're gonna have to roll out a fair few different players to chase points. And if you're 10,000, you're gonna roll out like a medium amount of different players to chase points. But if I was sitting probably like 300, so I was just looking for that 1 point of difference player. I'd spend hours, and I know you do these sheets on Twitter, but the percentage owned in the top 100%. In the top 100, the percentage owned of the players in the top 100 coaches. So I'd try to find a player that's not in that list, or I'd try to find a player that might just give me a leg up, get me an extra 20 points on that rest of that top 100 bracket. Because the teams do get very similar these days, especially with the amount of information on hand. So you need to find a little. If you just, I was in the 200 mark, and there was just one player that got me up. I can't remember the exact player, but it might have been like a Dane Zorko one week when everyone hopped off, I hopped on, and it got me into that top 50 range. So the deeper you are, the more sort of you have to roll the dice and run the risk. But if you find yourself close to the top, it's just that one risk. So one player could get the hat. But that's how I like to look at it.
So I guess, that brings us to the point of why we're here. Let's look at some players. So you've made a bit of a list of some guys that you're looking at that kind of offer that kind of, I guess, like Moneyball perspective that might see an uptick, or might be a player that's very lowly owned that could outperform their price. Who are some players that you've got on the list?
Yeah, it's a bit of a working list, so it's been work in progress over the pre-season. Some of the names might have dropped off on the priority, and some have gone up in priority. Obviously, we just had the practice matches, so I'll kick it off with a name that's just shot to the top of the list over the weekend, and that's Harrison Jones from Essendon. So he started probably quite low on the list. The only thing I recognised from him was last year, the back end of last year. He's obviously been a key forward, 196 centimetres, and he was always very slim and wasn't quite building muscle and wasn't quite developing into the big, strong powerhouse key forward they wanted out of him. Probably at a crossroads in his career. And late last year, I remember recognising that he was on the wing at the MCG one day, and I was like, that's really weird. He's playing really high up the ground. This is a full forward, meant to be a developing full forward. They've obviously got Peter Wright and had Stringer at the time and everyone else. So he got pushed up the ground, and I was like, that's just something that stuck in my brain over the off season. So I put him on the list. As he's gone on the list, I saw him on the wing one day at the MCG for 3/4 of the game. So he's gone on the list. He's gone on the point of difference list because it's something about out of the ordinary. In the Praggy match of the weekend, he played full wing time and racked up, 115 fantasy points. So just that one 3/4 of footy that I was watching last year, I go, Harrison Jones should be playing in the goal square, but he's up on the wing. It sort of like just quirks my interest.
Yeah, the wing attendances is something. The wing attendance is something I watch pretty closely, and he did actually spend a good chunk of the season playing off that wing a little bit. It's something that Essendon really like to kind of roll with. Nick Cox is another guy that they've chucked on there a fair bit as well. Just they like that taller wingman. This is the kind of thing we're looking for. It's always for a different role or a different avenue to scoring. My only concern is like maybe someone like Nick Martin is looking like he's going to return to that wing a lot more this season. Xavier Dersmar was out injured for a good portion of last year. I think he was out for 5 or 6 games.
It was in that period when he did the back end of the season. I kept a little bit of a tabs on him, and he was playing a little bit of wing role, getting like 15, 16 touches. Still not full time on there, but if he does go full time, that tall winger, Fife was one of the early ones. I'm trying to think. Blake Acres is sort of maybe one of the modern ones, or Bergman.
Matthew Richardson back in the day, turned his
Matthew
season
Richardson
around.
up on the wing. Sorry, I have to wind it back even further. I don't even know if Fantasy and Supercoach the stuff was around back in those days, but
no, it certainly was, mate. I had him.
But yeah, the tall winger, and I see clubs like to chase it, and if they chase it, there could be a bit of scoring potential there for someone who's he's in 0.6% of teams, and he's in mid 500k range in fantasy, and I'm sure in a lot of draft leagues he's undrafted or sitting on a waiver. So 24 years old, it's his 5th season in the comp. Starting to finally put find the speed of the game. They always say about that 5 years, 50 games, players start to feel the speed of the game. So it's one where definitely massive breakout contender, I reckon.
All right, who else you got on your list?
This is going to be the most someone will clip this up and Twitter will just eat me alive for this. But I'm a massive supporter and massive fan of Rory Atkins.
I don't mind it.
And
go on.
Twitter's not. Twitter just is not, and comment sections on posts are just not. And anytime his name gets mentioned, it's a bloodbath in the comments. So I'm not a massively vocal fan of Rory Atkins, but I definitely love the bloke, and I love the idea of what they're going to use him with this year at Port Adelaide. So he's in 0.12% of teams, so really one of the lowest owned players you can find in the comp. He's in his 30s, at his third club. Everything's against him. The media's against him. But I just think the role that he could play at Port Adelaide is a fantasy-friendly role. And we wind it back. You like to wind it back to Matty Richardson. We could wind it all the way back to Hamish Hartlett's, Matt Broadbent's. All had some fantasy pedigree. Moving forward, we've got Burgoyne and Sin with some fantasy pedigree. Even Riley Bonner, who I think he could be a good comparison to this year. It was last year Riley Bonner delisted, picked up late. No one really rated his chances, and he just proved a little bit of fantasy, relevance for a good half a season there. And I think Atkins might not be the whole season, but if you can ride a wave of 3 or 4 weeks where he just gets in the team, gets 3 good scores, that'll be something that shoots you up the rankings.
Yeah, I'm not against that. I think he's someone who will struggle to make the side come round 1. So maybe he's not in your initial plans. But if you look back at, I think it was 2 or 3 seasons ago, maybe 2 seasons ago at Gold Coast, he did have a 6-week period where he was one of the better, defenders in the game, especially when you talk about value for money. The thing with Rory Atkins is when he plays, he'll score. It's just the issue is how often will he play. But if you're happy to make that, if it's like a downgrade option when you're desperate mid-season or something like that, you're going to do a lot worse than Rory Atkins if he gets a game. And just looking at the team now, we saw Jeremy Finlayson go bananas on the weekend, kind of playing a half-back role. I'm not sure whether that's real or not, because there's still a couple of defenders to come back into Port's side in terms of Zerk Thatcher as a taller option and potentially a Sava, what they choose to do with him as well. So I think right now it's a bit tough for someone like Rory Atkins to probably find his way in, but you never know with a few injuries and stuff like that. Could find himself in there. And I don't think it's the worst option. All right, who else you got on your list?
With him, I'll just say with him is one thing is he keep tabs on him. If he does play a sub role early in the year and he dishes up a few 20s and 30s, that price is only going to go down. So it's maybe round 8 or 9, injury strikes, Atkins full-time in the team for 4 weeks, and he's sitting at 400k. So that's the one. I would keep tabs on him. I just mentioned he scored 920-plus scores in the VFL last year, as well as 160 and 150. So there's fantasy pedigree there. It's just game time. The role and game time are the only questions, and it'll happen at some point. It'll click, and Kenny will get him in, and you just got to find the round. So that's the one. I've got massive tabs on him. I won't publicly tweet it because I'll get eaten alive. But another one, everyone's looking at the second ruck, and I think maybe Gorney got beaten up a fair bit on the weekend, and English had his injury concerns over the pre-season. So rucks just seem to be a bit of a headache at the moment. You've got Rowan Marshall. Is he going to play round one? Are they going to play Harry Boyd? So Riley O'Brien, for me, just streams consistency, and I've just got him really low owned. He got dropped halfway through last year. Obviously, Kieran Strawn's injured, so there's not as much risk to get dropped this year. But when he came back from being dropped, averaged 103 across a 5-week stretch. Very consistent, doesn't really dip down, and it's just one that I'm like, when there's going to be so much uncertainty in like injury and fitness of players, I think Riley O'Brien's just been like consistently in that top third of my point of difference list.
Yeah, I don't mind that one either. Like, he's always been a consistent scorer. I guess the knock was last year they trialled Strawn for a few weeks, so I'm not sure if there was him getting out of favour at the Crows or whatnot. They did pick up Lachlan McAndrew as more depth to their ruck position, so there is some concern there, but I don't think it's as warranted as it probably was last year. But no, I 100% agree. He's a solid option in your drafts. Like, he's someone I target. If you miss out on the ruck run or early on the ruck run, you miss out on your Cherries, your Marshalls, your Gawns, the De Konings, all those kind of players up the top of the list. He's one I'll just aim to pick up as the last pick rucked, out of the starting 12 that you'd have in your league. So yeah, I think that's a decent option. I think as well, with a lot of people going to be going with De Koning as ruck 2, like, there's every chance that he could average pretty similar to De Koning. If he's in the high 90s kind of range, O'Brien could do a similar type of thing as well. So you're at least got a pod there. If not, he doesn't match De Koning there,
Yeah, I feel like everyone's talking about De Koning, Jerry, but no one's really talking about Rob, and it's just consistency that is safe for me. I like the safety of the consistent scoring. Crows are probably going to be a team a little bit on the up, so you always see a little bit of a boost when they win a few more games, a couple points here and there go up on the scores. So I'll keep on the rucks, and this is just a watch that I've had all pre-season. It hasn't really come to fruition, but Toby Nankervis is turning 31 this year. He's only averaged 19 games for the last 6 years, and they don't have a backup ruck at Richmond at the moment. So Samson Ryan's probably the closest thing to it, and they prefer to play him as a forward. I don't know if he's going to ever take a number one ruck role. There are the two ruckmen on their list. Mate Kalina is an ex-basketballer, hasn't played since 2022. Oliver Hayes-Brown played in the VAFA last year, which is a competition I play in. So they're lacking some backup ruck options, and I was just scouting around on who would take the reins, and I didn't really see much in the pracky matches, unfortunately, but it's one that I've got to watch on for a mid-season downgrade. Who knows if Nank gets injured? You got to have a heavy watch on who's going to be the guy to come in. So.
Yeah, I watched one of their games quite closely, and it was split between split between Ryan and Hayes Brown. Hayes Brown was someone they chucked forward a bit more, or they kind of put them both forward, but he rucked the forward lines a bit more, and then it was like more of a rotation between the other two. So Hayes Brown is someone who can go forward for them, and I think he kind of works well in tandem with Ryan as well. So. Yeah, that is, and Nank's going to go down at some point. Like,
at some point, I hope he doesn't. Yeah. He goes down, Richmond goes down. I hope he doesn't, but there's a lot of pressure on his shoulders. He's easy to target when there isn't the Dusties around, and the opposition can definitely tag him out of games and target him. So just a cause for concern. Same as Roy Atkins, keeping tabs on that one for later in the year. Just have the Nank folder ready to go, and when it happens, or if it happens. Do we jump on Oliver Hayes-Brown for a couple of weeks? Is he a handy enough scorer? I didn't see it enough in the pre-season games, but maybe watch a few VFL early games.
Yeah, definitely. Anyone else you got on your list?
Yeah, just scrolling through. I had a few that didn't really quite perform, but were on the list and sort of worked their way down, so I'll just read through a few of them. I was really hot on Elijah Hollands and Ollie Henry, and they didn't get a lot of game time. Elijah Hollands came on late in the game in the pracky match. I think Ollie Henry copped the knock. Neil Bullen was on the list, and he scored okay at 77 and 20 disposal on the weekend, but I just didn't like his game. I wasn't a big fan of his role, and it didn't get really damaging near goal where there's going to be take those 70s to 100s. I didn't think he got, with Rankin and Rochelle and everyone else that they've got with the X factor in the forward line, I think he's going to be playing too high up the ground. Tom Sparrow was on there. He scored okay, but again, he's kicked 2 goals and was playing quite forward. Didn't see much mid-time. And Jasper Fletcher was on there, and he kicked 1 goal, 2, and had 79. So they just knocked down the list a little bit, but I'm going to keep an eye on them for the first few weeks.
Yeah.
What about you? Any names you've been...
Yeah, I've got a few on a list that I've actually brought into my side. My kind of strategy, in all honesty, I've put a lot of time into Classic this year. Been pretty focused on the Keeper League and draft side of things, and was even debating whether I even play Classic this year. But I've decided to have another crack, purely because as well, like the Supercoach, I've been kind of focusing on a bit more as well. But the salary cap formats, I don't know, not doing it for me at the moment. But I have kind of adjusted my team since anyway, and there's a few names that they're not as kind of left field as yours, but they're definitely low on the ownership side of things that I've really liked over the pre-season games. Tom Powell is the biggest one for me. I don't think he went under 100 in any of the practice matches over the 3 weeks. Was big in their trial match as well. Really lowly owned. He's still kind of priced at 807k, so it's not huge. But a strategy with mine is to try to pick, like, unless you're confident that a player is going to be in the top of their position by the end of the season. So for me, for example, I think Tristan Cherry is. I think Jason Horne-Francis is going to be, in the top 6 or whatever. If you're certain they are, then pick him. If not, the next best bet, I think, is to try to make cash off of a player. So pick someone who's going to outperform their average, make some money, and then that way you can kind of have a look at who the best player is when it comes to trade them out, and you can kind of go to them instead of trying to predict without having seen them before, if that makes sense. So that's kind of my take on this one. So Tom Powell is someone that fits the mold for me, priced at 800k. I reckon he could average 95 plus, this season. And, coming from off a 78 average last year, like if he goes over 15 points per game more, that's going to make you some money. And it looks like he's kind of moved up into that almost number 2, probably number 3 midfielder role behind Sheasel and LDU. But I still think it's going to be a good fantasy scoring midfield. And plus, what happens with Sheasel? Do they move him back? He seems to just have a license to really do what he wants in that North Melbourne side. So I think he could even be like the main kind of scorer in that midfield at times, especially when Sheasel moves out and maybe goes back or forward at times as well. Have you put any thought into Power?
Definitely. I think the good thing there is the midfield's, like, as a whole, is on the up. So you've got Will Phillips, who's another breakout contender. You got Tristan Xerri, who's everyone reckons going to take another 10% on what he did last year and sort of solidify himself as an All-Australian. You've got Sheasel, who's on the up, is a young and up-and-coming kid, and you got Power, who's on the up. So I think the whole midfield as a whole is going to go up 10, 15%. So when everyone around you is improving, I think you just naturally go up as well. It's like when a team starts winning more games or being competitive, you see 3 or 4 or 5 points go up on their average. So definitely one that's going to average more than he did last year. I think that's it's not a lock, but it's a pretty good bet.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I'm just looking for guys that could go 10, 15 on their last year's average, and that kind of gets them up to that next kind of price range where you can go sideways to a proper primo with the right downgrade along with it. I've just got a bit of a list here. Lockie Ash as well is a guy who's not super highly owned in the formats, who I think is just going to go. I think he's 1% owned at the moment. I think he's going to go to that next level, just given that they've lost Perryman to Collingwood. There's kind of a hole in that defensive line to pick up a few points there. Whitfield's getting on in age. I know he's the kind of primary point getter back there, but there will be a time where Father Time does catch up. It might not be this year, but it could be this year, And I think just Ash is primed coming into, he's 23 now, so he's coming into his 5th year, I think, at AFL level, and it's just about time that he kind of took that next leap, and I'm willing to gamble that this year is the year he takes that next leap, and, I think he could push to, 85, maybe even 90 from there, and if that happens, that's an 8 to kind of 12 point uptick in his scoring, and again, just gives you time to make cash and have a look at who the top scorers are and who to sideways trade if it doesn't come off. So yeah, thoughts?
He's been a roller coaster, and he's been an annoying one because it's not all on his own. And I've had him in draft before, and he's someone who definitely for draft I'd be locking in this year if you finally get his spot with Perryman out the picture and coming out the picture. But he might go 130, 100, 90, then he get injured, and it's like, I'm so unfortunate, and it takes him ages to get back in the team because it's such a competitive role at GWS, that role, and then he'll get back in the team and look like he's going to lock down the role, and another injury or another suspension, or so. It's just like, it's been a frustrating roller coaster with him, where then he finds himself in the sub vest for 4 or 5 weeks, and it bumps his average really down. If you look at his sub games, there's been some 20s and 30s in there that would kill his averages, and he's probably someone who should have been averaging high 80s, low 90s the last 2 years. So yeah, definitely one who's a bit underpriced and a little underappreciated, I think, in draft leagues. So
Yeah, 100%. I'll add one more name to my list I'll throw out there that he's not actually in my team at the moment, but I'm thinking about it, and that's Angus Sheldrick. We all remember, I think 2 seasons ago, he came in mid-season to cover some midfield injuries and put up some decent averages. I think he ended up getting injured by the end of the year, and we all had to trade him out. But with the news of Callum Mills going down in the pre-season, something's wrong with his foot that looks like he's going to be out until round 4 at least. I reckon that just gives Sheldrick a little bit of time to kind of get a run in that midfield and kind of just stamp his authority a little bit. Sheldrick's a player that's always been on the Keep League podcast radar because he was a massive underage scorer. And we've seen at AFL level, when he gets the opportunity, he can score well as well. It's just all about that opportunity. And I think, he's a player coming into his 4th season, I think, as well, which is about that time that you kind of make that adjustment and kind of find your breakout year. So priced at only $448K, I think he's someone that you can make a bit of money off in the midfield, especially with so many midfielders gone down. I am not confident as to who the kind of top 8 midfielders are going to be. To take a punt on any one of them, even players like Jordan Dawson look like a lock at the moment. But we've seen as soon as he gets a niggle or a tag comes to him, he's not quite at that kind of level. There's quite a few players, I think, in that range. And I probably feel more comfortable. Maybe comfortable is not the word, but I think it's a good year to take a risk on a player like that might only have 4 games locked into the side, but could take that opportunity to kind of present himself and become a best 22 player and, make some money for your side, especially when you're only priced around that $450K mark. So that's probably the other guy I'll drop. Any thoughts about Sheldrick?
Well, the opportunities are something you mentioned, and there's a lot of injuries at Sydney, so he's finally gets his crack, and I feel like it's not just him that's finally going to get whether it's a 3-week, 4-week crack, but there's a lot of those young guys that we know have got great junior pedigree that could stamp their spot in the side and be hard to shift out come round 4, round 5. So, Gordon going down and Mills not in the side currently. Grundy's not, maybe not in the side for round 0. So, there's a few spots up for grabs and a few opportunities going Sydney's way. So, definitely scout those. They used to be NEFL stats, but I guess it's VFL stats now.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's pretty much my list I've got for now. There are a few more names I could bring up, but we might save them for maybe another time when we have a chat and talk about them then.
Yeah, well, after we see this cyclone roll through, we might only get 2 games of footy this week, so might not be much to chat about next week. But I think there's a few teams playing pracky games. I know Port Adelaide's playing one on Friday. Probably be able to stream that on the laptop. But keep an eye on a few of those pracky games this week. The one thing I did say earlier though is the further you are away from the top is the more point of difference players you need to chase. So when you're starting in round 0 or round 1, you don't need to load up with 10 of these point of difference players. It's really just a one or two gambles or 1 or 2 risks in your team. Don't roll the whole list into your side just yet. But come round 10 when you're chasing and need to get back up into the top half of your league or want to get into the top 100, that's when we could dish up some really spicy names.
Yeah, I probably need to listen to that advice there, Checkers, because I reckon I've got all three of those guys I mentioned in my team right now. So
I think at the moment, most of my teams are most selected players. I've just got 2 players at under 10%. So just trying to keep it safe.
Yeah,
you do get trapped every year. You read into the pre-season articles and you think you found a gem in the rough. So that's what could derail your season before it even begins.
Absolutely. Anyways, mate, I'll leave you to it. Been a pleasure chatting fantasy with you, and I think this is something we'll try to do semi-regularly this season. Jump on and have a chat about some players and how our teams are going and stuff like that.
Yeah, hopefully weekly, and I think as the season progresses, we'll have a lot more names to pick apart. We've only had 2 pracky games, and once the VFL and the SANFL kicks in a gear, we'll be able to really scout some numbers and some stats for you. So, looking forward to that.
Well, thanks for watching, people, and we'll talk to you soon.